There's a book hidden deep in the library, and if your name appears in it, something terrifying will start spinning in your life. I found my name inside and now I'm running out of time before the curse catches you too. Subscribe while you still can. Have you ever read something you weren't supposed to? A passage, a name, a description that felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be spoken, yet now it lingers in your mind. I need to warn you, once you hear this story, you might start seeing the signs. It started with an old library and a book that shouldn't exist. I had always been drawn to old bookstores and libraries, places where history clung to the air like dust. That's why, when I visited Boston last summer, I made it a point to stop at the Boston Athenaeum, one of the oldest libraries in the country, founded in 1807. I expected to find rare manuscripts and forgotten journals, but what I found instead was something far more disturbing. While browsing a dimly lit section of historical archives, I noticed a gap in the neatly organized shelves. A single, thin book sat slightly pushed back, as if someone had hidden it. The title was barely legible, faded gold lettering on cracked leather, the silent names. It wasn't cataloged. No ISBN, no author. Just a handwritten note on the first page. Do not read aloud. I should have stopped there. Curiosity got the better of me. The pages were brittle, filled with names, long, strange names. Some crossed out, others underlined. The ink looked fresh despite the book's age. One name stood out, Edward Hawthorne Graves. The moment I read it, I felt a shift. The library around me dimmed. The overhead lamps flickered. I felt watched. A cold whisper brushed my ear. You weren't supposed to see that. I turned, heart pounding. The library was empty. But when I looked back at the book, the name had changed. My name was there. That's when I heard the slow, deliberate footsteps. A man emerged from the shadows between the bookshelves. He was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face gaunt and stretched too tight over his skull. His voice was barely a whisper. You read the name. You've been marked. I stammered, asking who he was. He gestured at the book. You shouldn't have spoken it. They know you now. Before I could react, he reached out and snapped the book shut. The sound echoed, louder than it should have been. Then, without another word, he walked away, vanishing behind a row of bookshelves that didn't have an exit. I tried to shake it off as some elaborate prank, but that night, in my hotel room, the unease grew. Every reflective surface, my phone screen, the bathroom mirror, the window showed something slightly wrong, a figure just out of sight, a shadow that wasn't mine. My name, my real name, sounded unfamiliar when I spoke it aloud. Then the messages started. An unknown number sent me a text. Erase the name before it erases you. I didn't reply. My phone buzzed again. Don't answer the knocking. Then, as if on cue, a knock at my hotel door. Soft, rhythmic. I didn't move. The knocking continued. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice. I can hear you in there. The next morning, I went back to the library. The book was gone. I started digging. Edward Hawthorne Graves was a real person, a historian who vanished in 1952. He had been researching the Hawthorne Arms Hotel, a building that supposedly disappeared overnight. No records of its demolition, no trace of where it had gone. And every researcher who had looked into it disappeared too, including the man from the library. I checked the security footage. No one had been there but me. I had spoken a name that should have stayed forgotten, and now something was following me. I tried to leave Boston. My flight was delayed. My train was canceled. When I finally managed to drive out, I saw something impossible in my rearview mirror. A towering building, the Hawthorne Arms, the same hotel that was erased from history. And standing in front of it, the man from the library. He raised his hand, pointing at me, and then the knocking began again, from inside my car. I thought I could escape, but when I looked at my reflection again, it wasn't me looking back. And then, my phone screen lit up with one final message. You're next. If you found a book that warned you not to read it aloud, would you still do it? Tell me in the comments. You remember what I told you, right? Once you read the name, once you hear it, it doesn't let you go. I tried to run. I tried to forget. But history, true history, doesn't let you escape. They found me again. When I left Boston, I thought I was safe. I didn't talk about what happened at the Athenaeum. I avoided looking into mirrors. I even changed my number. It didn't matter. A week later, back home in New York, the sign started appearing again. It was little things at first. My name written in my own handwriting on sticky notes I didn't remember leaving. Shadows in the corner of my apartment that weren't there when I turned my head. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was my reflection. I was avoiding mirrors, but you don't realize how many reflective surfaces you interact with daily until you start paying attention. My phone screen, store windows, the microwave door. And each time, something was off. At first, it was subtle. My reflection blinked just a little too late. My lips moved when I wasn't speaking. Then, one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection, watching me. I mean that literally. I turned away, but the reflection didn't. It was still facing me, its eyes locked onto mine. I didn't sleep that night. I needed answers. I knew this wasn't just paranoia. I went back online, digging through historical archives about Edward Hawthorne graves and the Hawthorne Arms Hotel. That's when I found something new. An old newspaper clipping from 1952. It mentioned a historian's disappearance while researching forbidden texts and ghost names. The article described an urban legend that locals whispered about. A book that recorded names not meant to be spoken. One sentence stood out. Those who see their own name in the silent names will soon find themselves erased, replaced by something else. I slammed my laptop shut. My hands were shaking. I had seen my name. That night, the knocking returned. It started at my front door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. Then it moved to my bedroom door. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Heart hammering. I whispered, "Who's there?" A pause. Then, from the other side of the door, a voice, low, familiar. "You know who?" I didn't move. The knob twisted. I ran out of my apartment, not stopping until I was in my car, breath fogging up the windshield. My phone vibrated. A new message from an unknown number. "Come back to where it started. The book is waiting." I drove back to Boston that night. The Athenaeum was closed, but that didn't stop me. I broke in through a side entrance, heart pounding. The library was silent, too silent. The history section looked untouched, but when I reached the shelf where I found the silent names, it was there, waiting for me. The book was open this time. My name wasn't just written in it, it was crossed out. Behind me, footsteps. I turned, and there he was, the archivist. But this time, he looked different. His face was less human. His skin stretched too thin, his mouth slightly open as if whispering something I couldn't hear. "You should not have come back." I backed away, but he didn't move closer. Instead, he reached out and turned the page of the book. The next name was written in fresh ink. It was mine again. But this time, it had an expiration date. Tomorrow's date. I shook my head. "What happens if I cross it out?" His eyes darkened. "Then something else takes your place." My hands trembled. "And if I don't?" He exhaled slowly, his breath cold. "Then you fade, and your reflection becomes real." I stared at the book. My reflection in the library's window was watching me, smiling. I had 2 options. Cross out my name and risk someone else suffering, or do nothing and let whatever was inside that book take me. I picked up the pen left beside the book. My hand hovered over the inked letters of my name. Behind me, the archivist whispered, "Choose." I swallowed. I made my choice. When I walked out of that library, the world felt different. It looked the same, but something was wrong. I should have never touched that book. Because now, when I see my reflection, it doesn't smile anymore. Would you have crossed your name out or taken the risk? Tell me in the comments.